Mr. Sperry, I handed you exhibits number 2 through 8 before we broke, and those are the various writings that you've examined. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
First of all, let me ask you before we go into those, or before we ask you about the handwriting in those, let me ask you about indentations. Just what are indented writings or indentations in your field?
Indented writings or impressions are simply normally latent impressions, frequently visible, but many times latent impressions that are left when you make some sort of a writing or marking on a document that transfers to a document below it. We frequently encounter that in work with check cases. Obviously, the impressions of a pre-existing or check 203 above check 204, threatening notes, harassment notes, even suicide notes, always examined for impressions. See what type of information may be on those types of documents. A lot of the ability to detect impressions depends on the type of writing instrument that was used, writing pressure, and things of that nature. Since this particular case pertains to impressions involving letters and envelope, this particular case, the envelope, which is Exhibit 2? I'm sorry, yes, it's Exhibit 2. The entries on this envelope were written with a ballpoint pen, black ballpoint pen. There's even overwriting. And there's sufficient pressure exhibited within the writing to indicate that should there be something underneath it, there should be some impressions left. I use an instrument called the electrostatic detection apparatus in addition to normal side lighting visualizing techniques. A ESDA, as it's known, is capable of detecting indented writings and impressions, 10 or 12, 15 pages deep into a pad of paper, depending on, again, the variables that exist. In this particular case, I examined for indented writings both Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 3.
Exhibit 3 being the question letter at issue, Exhibit 3,
Correct.
Which is Q2.
Yes, and I used, again, the ESDA as well as the visualizing indented writings technique, which is just simply side lighting. Also used in conjunction with the ESDA various techniques such as slight humidification of the document, make it a little more porous. It is, after all, a little bit, somewhat older. All of those yielded negative results. And what's significant about that?
What is significant about that?
The impressions from the address and return address entries on the envelope. Had there been nothing in the envelope at the time those entries were written, those impressions would be visible on the inside back of that envelope. They aren't.
And meaning what?
Well, meaning that there was a piece of paper or something in the envelope at the time that the address entries were written. Additionally, as I mentioned, or I didn't mention, but I will, there's machine impressions on the document from a cancellation stamp for the post office and a round dater cancellation impression. Again, those are machine produced entries that frequently find their way as impressions on documents. Those impressions are not on the back inside of the envelope either.
And again, what's the significance?
Well, the significance is there was something in the envelope at the time that the handwriting was put on the envelope, and at the time the cancellation marks were made.
Okay. Anything else about indentations you want to?
Yes, the letter itself
Go ahead.
had no impressions.
All right.
The impressions of the envelope entries were not on the letter. There's no machine markings evident through the various techniques that I conducted.
What exhibit is that?
That's Exhibit 3. Okay. Which means really that Exhibit 3 was not in the envelope. And that some other letter was in the envelope at the time that some other document was in the envelope other than Exhibit 3 at the time the handwriting address and addressee entries.
So Exhibit 3, the contested letter, was not in the Q2, the envelope, at the time it was addressed.
Correct. And something else was.
Right. And can I, let me briefly show those to the court. We were talking about them, but I want to show it to the prior fact. And Exhibit 2 is what you're referring to as, that's the, of course, the envelope.
Correct.
And you say that, and this is the contested letter, Exhibit number 3, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And there are no indentations on that?
The impression, right, that's correct. The impressions from the envelope are not on the
Meaning
letter.
to you, it was not in the envelope at the time the envelope was
Right.
written on.
Correct. And the inside, if you look at the inside of Exhibit 2, just kind of, oh, that's good, I guess. The inside back of Exhibit 2.
Yes, let me try to, that.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Inside back of Exhibit 2, if there was nothing in the envelope at the time it was addressed, should have the impressions of the address entries.
And there were none.
There were none, so.
And before we get into the handwriting, did you also examine the ink on Exhibits 2 and 3?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what did you do with regard to that?
Oh, I conducted a microscopic analysis of the inks. Both of them are black ballpoint inks on Exhibits 2 and Exhibits 3. Additionally, of course, I scanned in all of the documents at a high resolution to facilitate some additional examinations that I conducted later with computer assistance. But with respect to the inks, microscopically, there was some distinction, but as part of the examination process, between 2 and 3, as part of the examination process, I subjected both documents to examination utilizing alternate light sources, infrared, ultraviolet, and infrared luminescence, utilizing a video spectral comparator, which I have in my laboratory. And
what is that?
a video spectral comparator is a device that is primarily used for detecting differences in inks, and it's very helpful in deciphering obliterations, location of erasure sites, that type of thing. But mostly it's ink differentiation, where you have two black inks that to the naked eye appear to be the same. Many times they have different chemical properties that react differently when subjected to different types of light. And the video spectral comparator allows me to use a series of filters to look at those inks or ink in areas of the spectrum that the human eye cannot detect.
What did your analysis show regarding Exhibits 2 and 3, which are the letter and the question, the envelope and the question letter?
Well, it showed conclusively that although the black ballpoint inks may appear visually to be the same on 2 and 3, 2 and 3 were written with two entirely different pens, inks.
So Exhibit 2 was written with a different type of black ink than the Exhibit number 3, the letter.
Exactly.
Did you prepare some charts that would help explain your testimony?
Yes, they're just simple video or visual aids, yes.
I'm going to hand you 3 documents that contain an image on there and ask if you can identify what those are.
Yes, these are essentially screenshots or saved images of what appears on the screen of video spectral comparator when comparing the inks on Exhibit 2 and 3 using various techniques, a couple of different techniques.
Can those 3 pages containing the screenshot be marked and admitted as the next 3 exhibits?
Received as Exhibits 11, 12, and 13.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to put up exhibit number 11 first, and ask if you can tell the court what this is and what it shows.
Yes, this is just Exhibit 11 is a screenshot that has both a portion of Exhibit 2 up in this area and Exhibit 3 down in this area. And this is just to show how the documents appear under normal light.
So this would be normal light.
Yeah, this is just a normal light.
All right. I'm now going to put up exhibit number 12. Ask if you can describe what this shows.
Yes, this is on 12. This area here is actually where, you can't see it, but it's where portions of the address entry on Exhibit 2 appear.
What this-
Correct.
Okay.
And of course, down here is the portion of Exhibit 3. And this is a screenshot of these documents exposed simultaneously to infrared light filtered at 610 nanometers. So what's happening is the ink in Exhibit 2 is essentially, as we say, dropping out. It becomes invisible, where the ink on
This ink up here is in.
yeah, that's dropping out. Exhibit 2, however, there's some absorption there, so the entry is visible.
And finally, I'm going to put up exhibit number 13.
Exhibit 13, again, we have on the bottom portion of Exhibit 13, this is a portion of the return address on Exhibit 2, and this is a portion of Exhibit 3, and this is just a different technique involving the VSC. In this particular case, we're looking at what we call infrared luminescence, and what's happening here is that the documents are being exposed simultaneously to a rather intense light source at roughly 400 to 540 nanometers and filtered at 695. So what's happening is the ink on Exhibit 2 is luminescing, appears very bright, and the ink that comprises Exhibit 3 does not luminesce.
And leading to your conclusion that there are two different inks.
They're absolutely two different inks.
Let me ask you now about the handwriting analysis you did involving Exhibits 2 through Exhibit 8.
Yes, sir.
What technical examinations of the handwriting in Exhibits 2 through 8 did you conduct?
Conducted a number of examinations. There was some testimony earlier with respect to the process of an examination. In a handwriting examination, the first order of business, in my opinion, is to examine the questioned writing. Examine the questioned writing to determine whether or not it has value for identification. If a writing does not have value for identification, there's obviously no need to proceed to the known writings. So in this particular case, as in all cases involving handwriting, began by examining the writing, the questioned writing. Purpose of that was to determine the writing's value in terms of identifying features and characteristics of the writing. Letters, letter formations, habits with respect to letter combinations, relative slant, absolute slant, naturalness of the writing or not, just evaluating the writing in its entirety. In doing so, I used unaided eye, of course, but I also used microscopic techniques as well as a computer program designed specifically for forensic document examiners and designed specifically for this type of a case. When comparing handwriting, frequently we're provided with verbatim writings. In other words, I'll have a signature or I'll have a document, and I will have verbatim writing that's been provided by the subject or the victim or whatever. So I'm comparing apples to apples, THs to THs. In a case like this, we have voluminous questioned writing or handprinting, and we also have voluminous known writings. So if I'm assessing what is a particular writer's habit, let's look in the questioned writing. I'm looking at the questioned writing. I'm trying to determine what the habits are with respect to this writer, among other things, and I'm looking for THs, or I'm looking for H's, or I'm looking for G's. I'm looking for all these letter features. It becomes very, very tedious and difficult if I'm going down a document trying to find all these and put them in some sort of order. In this particular program that I use, what happens essentially is you scan in all of your documents, and then you take the images of those documents and you type in or key punch in the text of the documents. You actually type them in. And then you associate the text with the image, that particular word, if you will. From that point on, I can bring up any words, any letters that I want for comparison side by side. So if I want to look at all the THs in the question document, I can look at every single one of them at once in a series, or the H's or the U's. If I want to know how many U's or THs, the program does that for me, among other things. It also helps with reports and prepares image reports for me. So it is a time saver, but more than a time saver, it actually facilitates the examination process. It doesn't take the place of the examination. It doesn't make comparisons, but it provides me a means by which I can make very, very accurate comparisons as opposed to hit and miss trying to hunt and peck around through a series of documents. So that's the technique that was used and is used in these types of cases where there's a lot of writing, but not a lot of verbatim writing. Having conducted an examination of the questioned writings, first of all with respect to Exhibit Q2, the envelope, the writing appears to be naturally executed. There's some overwriting, but there's no evidence of any sort of distortion or unnaturalness in the writing. It's fluid, and pressure variation and such is what you'd expect in a natural writing. No apparent patching or alterations to the normal writing strokes were evident. Evaluated the writing features and characteristics and found suitable writing there for comparison with the knowns. So doing the same thing with the knowns with the computer process that I mentioned earlier, I now had a very, very at my fingertips resource and idea, more than an idea, ability to assess Mr. Anthony Bond's writing habits from the various known writings. I could actually, part of the comparison process involves a detailed assessment of the known writings. The purpose of that detailed assessment and evaluation is to determine the person's writing habit within the writings that you have. So in other words, if I want to know about Mr. Bond's writing habits with respect to the TH combination or a J or anything of that nature, I can do that by evaluating a whole series of those at once. And by evaluating those, I know not only have an idea in terms of how the letters are formed, what the letter combinations, what value they may have, but I also can begin to assess variation. In other words, what are the likely variances within his known writing that I can see in these particular documents collectively. So now I have an idea at that point, a very good idea, a very manageable understanding of this person's writing habits within the documents that I have and the variation with respect to the letters. So the next step is a side-by-side comparison. With respect to Exhibit Q2, I did such and determined that there were features and characteristics in agreement with no fundamental differences to conclude that Mr. Bond did in fact write the entries on Exhibit 2.
Which is the envelope, Exhibit 2.
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Did the same, essentially the same process with Exhibit Q3. Again, I utilized the computer process to facilitate the comparisons and examination of Q3. Q3's got a lot of problems. There's patching. There's evidence in Q3 of efforts to touch up some of the letters that would otherwise you wouldn't expect to occur in the writing. There's letter formations that...
Could you put Q3 up, if you don't mind, counsel?
This is Exhibit 3, and this is, Q3 is the, do you want the envelope or the letter, Your Honor?
I think you were talking about...
letter.
Right.
The letter, as I understand it.
Right, it's Exhibit 3, and it's, so the letter is Q2, and it's Exhibit 3, Your Honor.
Right.
Right, I think it's important. I don't think there's any confusion.
Yes, yes, sir.
We want to make sure there's not any.
Right, this is Q2, but Exhibit 3. And go ahead, Mr. Sperry, and let me know if you need me to make it bigger or do anything else.
Well, I'd like to get to my court chart in a minute.
Okay.
But
And I think have we sealed the enclosing plastic, or is it able to be taken
It
out?
can come in and out, Your Honor. Do you want me to take it out?
I think for this purposes, we maybe ought to be careful, obviously. We don't want to affect it, but
See it, you can definitely see it.
that will take the glare off.
Yes.
Okay, that's much easier to see, if you don't
Yes,
mind.
Your Honor. Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Sperry.
In assessing the writing in the question, one of the things I noticed with respect to certain letter features and characteristics had to do with the G's and the H's and the E's and so forth. But microscopically, I actually looked, because we have an original to work with, for the most part, I could look at these various letters and determine how they were made. In other words, how the letter formations were actually constructed, and which is a big help, because if somebody is trying to simulate, and this is again not uncommon in prison or jail situations whatsoever, if someone's trying to simulate, they're going to capture the pictorial similarity of whoever's writing is they're trying to simulate, and that's fairly standard. They have so much time and a lot of talent actually in there in terms of simulation. What they miss many times is how the letters form. So yeah, the letter looks like the way the person writes, but it's made entirely different. And the way you tell it's made entirely different, obviously, is with a little closer examination, in this case microscopically, or even some of these are visible without a microscope. And there may be some other letters that they just missed the boat on entirely in terms of failing to capture how the letter actually appears. And a couple of those, and I'm going to have a court chart, Your Honor. You'll notice the H in have.
You're on line 6 in the letter,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, sir.
in the middle of the page.
Right. At this point in the H, right in this area here, is a stop, slight hesitation on the ink line, and then the...
Figured you'll have to draw it again, so...
Okay. In other words, it's not fluid. Right in here, there's a change of direction, a slight hesitation in this area, and down in this area it goes. Could we back out just a minute?
Okay. You can step down if you wish.
Here's another example in this area
Portal
here
line.
on the H.
And you're looking now at the next line down, line 7,
Correct.
and the word they.
Right. Here's an example of a J up in here, which is, I guess, the second line down, and we'll get to that in a minute. But this is a natural move. It's a J formation. The U. There was some testimony earlier about the U. There was all of the U's within Exhibit Q3 are made without a right staff. They're all freestanding U's, if you will. The G formation, and again, we'll see a little bit of this in the chart. G formation is either anywhere from a 2 to 3 stroke G. Here you have a pen lift in this area right here, and a second stroke, and there's a little hesitation there, and then a third stroke down here. It's either going to be a 2. Here's another example in this G of a 2, at least a 2 stroke. Actually, the top of the G stops right up in here, and then a separate movement left, or right rather, and then down, descending down to the baseline. Frequently, within the question writing, saw a number of instances where the writing was, there were some problems down in the lower extenders, where there would appear to be a lower extender. There was some sort of hesitation. Here's an example here in the U, where there's a little pressure variation coming down. There's hesitation here, and then the lower portion of the extender is drawn. Similarly, in the G, you can see some hesitation right in this area here, ahead of that. The Y formations, as an example, were very consistent for the most part in a hook off to the right. This is in the question. And that's something that, although we saw, or I saw, in the known writings, it wasn't anywhere near as consistent here. In the comparison process, again, what you're looking for is establishing a habit. What is this person's habit? This is the known writings. When working with known writings, you establish the person's habit. You establish the range of variation. And then you look at the features and characteristics within the question and determine whether or not they fit within the person's habit. The biggest mistakes that are made by forensic document examiners, or people that think they're forensic document examiners, is that they ignore differences. If you look for similarities and do not address the differences as they come, then you're going to make mistakes. A big mistake was made in I believe, Ms. Pierce's assessment of letter formations. I'm not sure what she was using exactly for her examination in terms of assessing how these letters were made, but one of the consistencies in the question is with respect to the E's, uppercase E's. Now you're going to see in the known writings some E's that appear to look like this, but these E's are consistent in the question document and how they're made, and they're made in this fashion. You have a stroke that comes down, there's a retrace of the staff, and a terminal, and then you've got your two strokes there. There's a little variation there, but what doesn't vary much at all, if at all, within the question, is the stroke down and up and over. In other words, a single stroke, kind of like an L. That is totally contrary to the way the E's are made in the known writings, as we'll see. In fact, we could put up a K2 or 3 or any one of them before I get to my charts. Let's use this one. Okay. Yeah.
And this is going to be exhibit number 8, Your Honor, which is K15, one of the known writings, exhibit number 8, K15.
Yeah, 8 has both K5 and 6.
Yes, Your Honor.
It's the letter of August 9, 2011. It should be.
Yes, Your Honor. This is exhibit number 8. Do you want me to just come out, or do you want me to? There it is.
You could focus all the way up here a little bit, at the top, more towards the top, because this has some of the similar characteristics that were replicated.
Okay, is that sufficient? Can you see that?
Sure, that's pretty good. Okay, and again, I keep referring to these charts I'm going to get to eventually, but there will be, the comparison's a little better in the charts. But here you have an idea in terms of the H's with the long terminal strokes descending below the baseline that was referred to earlier. Another example of that is here. They don't quite have, they're continuous strokes. There's no patching, there's no addition, there's very little tremor even here. This is a continuous stroke, as is this one. That's the habit of this writer. These are naturally executed writings. With respect to the G's, and here's an example of a G, this writer has a habit of making a single stroke G. That's the primary habit. In other words, it's made like this. Down, up, over, sometimes a little loop like that, and then down. Alternatively, up and down like that. Sometimes extending down below that. All right. My screen is not clearing. Let's see. There we go. The U's, I didn't find a single instance of a single stroke U anywhere within the known writings. They all have a staff. That is a fundamental difference.
What do you mean by fundamental difference?
It's an inexplicable difference in terms of if you're alleging that the writings and the natural writings in both, at least in the knowns, and with the extended writing we have in the question, the volume of the question, if the same writer's involved, even though it's only one characteristic, you would expect somewhere within either the question or the known to see a combination of these U's, staff or non-staff, to some degree. But there really is very little, if any, variation between, I mean, it's absolutely one in the K writings of Mr. Bond and absolutely another in the question in that area. And that's extremely problematic in terms of the writings allegedly being the same person. The E's formation, can we enlarge that just a minute?
Yes.
Mr. Harmon. We got some better ones here. Oh, there's a couple of good ones here. Look at this one's easy. Mr. Bond makes his E's with a single stroke down along the baseline. It's like this. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here's another example over here, where here you can actually see that it's made this way, and kind of like a Greek E inside the staff in that fashion there. Consistently. There's another example, there's another example. Just diametrically opposed to the E formation made in the question writings. Here's the example.
Would you go over that again?
Yes, sir.
Where you got the word first time. You were giving that illustration one more time.
I'm sorry, sir.
The illustration on first time. You see the E?
Oh, the E. I'm sorry. Okay.
Right. There
we are. All right.
Go through what you said about that again.
Okay. With respect to the E, this E here,
Yes.
it's made in this fashion. Stroke, 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 and I'm taking away from there's obviously speed in here, you got tapering. The point being that the staff is made, and this is a separate stroke.
Now, you just referred to the bottom
The bottom portion
of the E.
of the E formation, yes, sir. Here's another example here, where you can see that the staff is independent of that bottom portion. Matter of fact, here's a real good example in the word his, Your Honor. Or he, I'm sorry. Here's another example in the word died. Now, occasionally, and there are occasions where it appears that the E is I can move this document up perhaps just a little bit. Keeping the magnification, please. I want to try to illustrate.
Move it up like that? Or?
Yeah, here's one. Okay. In the word kite, top line.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The word kite. This E appears to be somewhat similar to what we've seen in the question. Again, the reminder of the question, E's are made in this fashion. But it's not. Actually, the E is made like this, and that stroke is made like that. It's disconnected.
So let me just go over. So you're saying that the known writing is on the E is comprised of 4 strokes. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's comprised of 4 strokes. Sometimes it's comprised of just 2, where, here's a good example, Your Honor, down here again is word E. You see that? You got a stroke, and then essentially you've got a what we call a Greeky hanging off of it. So it's made like this. But the difference lies, and it's consistent, in the known. Actually, there's more variation in the known, but the variation never incorporates what we see in the question. Some other areas that I assessed based on being able to put all of these various letters and combinations and so forth in the same field of view for comparison purposes. You look at your Fs, and we're talking about habits. So what I was able to do was I could look at a whole series of Fs made by Anthony Bond and assess his habit. What is the prominent habit that I see in those writings? And the prominent habit in Anthony Bond is more of a flat top F, in other words like this, flat across there. In the question writing, almost across the board, you see something like this, but more of an arch to it. This is a variation in Anthony's Bond's writing. Most of it's like this, but almost across the board in the question, it's more of an arch to it. And I found that arch configuration in the known and the question, or in the known were consistent, and they were consistently different compared to the bulk of what we had in the question. As an example, most of your known writings, you'll see the D formation, even though you have similarities, obviously, in terms of the size of the staff and so forth. The formation is more bulbous. In other words, it's more lateral than it is vertical. In the question writing, it's the other way around. In the H's, in addition to some of the other issues that the question writing has in Exhibit 3 with respect to some of the patching and so forth that goes on below that baseline. As a matter of habit, for the most part, tends to be in the known writings more of a squared off or flat top, and in the question, again, it's more of an arch in this fashion. Those are subtle, and there are some overlap, but if you're looking in terms of a habit, we got a lot of writing here. The habit of Mr. Bond is more of this area as opposed to what we'll see from the court charts. Same with the letter K's, and this is, again, obviously a known writing, but this is representative pretty much of Mr. Bond's K's in the word folks. And notice where the buckle or the crossbar, not so much how the K is formed, but its relationship to the staff, where it comes into the staff. Fairly consistent in terms of his habit. So it's a good habit in that regard. Here's another example in the word kite. As you'll see in a minute, in the question, most of the K's have good separation. In other words, it's a K that is made in this fashion where there's separation between the staff and the buckle of the K. So these are some of the examples, and I just, for the chart purposes, I use just a representative sampling. But these are some of the examples of some subtle areas and some not so subtle where differences lie. And it's an interesting case, but if you're looking for differences and addressing these differences, it's not an extremely difficult problem.
Are you ready to discuss your court chart?
Yes, sir, if I may.
I'll come back and ask you about all your final conclusions.
Yes, sir.
Now, can Mr. Sperry step down where he can control the...
That's fine. That's, I think that'll work fine.
Thank you.
Rather than me trying to...
You want him to be at the podium? Is that
Yeah, I
what
want him
you
to step right down here where he can control and move it up and down. And
All right, you may step down to the podium where you can move things where we can see them.
Have I got my microphone on?
I think your microphone is okay.
Testing. Okay.
And Mr. Perry, is this a court chart or a chart you prepared for court?
Yes, sir.
And can it be marked and admitted as the next exhibit, Your Honor?
Marked and received as 14.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'll display that to Your Honor, and I'll just let Mr. Perry discuss it, and you can move it up and back.
Without objection, we'll proceed in that way.
Should have cut these. Question, under the question entries column, these are all just samples of words, examples of words from Exhibit 3, the letter. On the right-hand side are representative samples of writings from various documents sent or submitted to me from allegedly belonging to Mr. Bond. Part of the comparison process, incidentally, in the known writings involved a cross-comparison of the known writings, Your Honor, to determine whether or not they were in fact, the known writings were in fact written by one person. Many times we get writings that come in that allegedly were made by Joe Blow. However, they've got Joe Blow and his wife and somebody else on the document as well, so they're mixed. And those will be, that's why the cross-comparison. I don't ever accept anyone's word that the collection of writings are by one person. If I have any doubt in my mind, I exclude the writings and do not use them in the comparison process. So I did do a cross-comparison of the various known writings, and in my opinion, they are the known writings are the writings of one person. Then conducted the comparison process. And this is, again, just a representative sampling. I apologize for the quality of the inkjet here. But you can see in the G formation, in this area here, if I can hold this down some fashion here. You've got a pin stop right up in here, and then you've got a stroke here and down. Here you've got a nice stop there.
Is indicated by the increased amount of ink deposited at that point.
The ink deposit, you have a slight, in this particular instance here, Your Honor. Again, this is, some of this is...
I just want to make sure I understand how you would know it was a pin.
Okay. How I'm doing it is microscopically. What I'm looking at is not so much a stop in the, well, it is part of ink pressure variation, but it's also overlapping of strokes. In other words, here's a good example. You've got the G coming up to, I'm going to try to do this right there. You can see how it comes up to this point and stops. That's actually, the G is ending, the bulb itself is ending right there. Pin is picked up, it's here, there's a slight hesitation there, and then you've got a stroke coming down this direction. Similarly, this G formation next to it comes up and stops. You've got a slight overlap here as the pin comes in this direction down. This is a little overriding on that one. This is an E, and this is an example here of the E in the question document where you have movement down, up, and over, stroke, and stroke. And here's more of an example of kind of an elongated letter formation with more of a point down at the base here. Not quite so there, but it's more elongated than it is fat, which is from a writing habit point of, from writing habit perspective, is consistent more so in the question and inconsistent largely with the habit in the known writings. The U, again, I've seen plenty of that, but here's the U in the question. It's a simple single stroke U formation. There are some differences in some of the S's, but there is quite a bit of variation, both within the question and the known, and therefore there is some overlap in that area. Looking at the known, here you get a good idea. More of this G formation. Here you've got there's a separation there. The G formation is made in this fashion, a slight retrace, down, around, through, a little loop there, and down. And that's pretty much indicative of this writer's habit overall in all of the uppercase G's. Again, here's a good example of the E formation. On the question writing,